Well, it's good to connect. It's good to connect.
Absolutely. I recognize your background. There's been 1 or 2 minutes of footage shot from that location.
This is this has been my permanent abode for several years now, much before the book came out. So it was subliminal marketing and insertion into the minds, like Inception in its true glory.
Yeah, we love doing our background and our research on folks, and there was like, we broke down the vintages of Ankur Warikoo based on background. Like there was the time when it was all the glass background, and then there was some whiteboard, and I was like, that's either their office or like a work share office. And and then the poster, the do epic shit poster, that's definitive.
Yeah, that's definitive. That is there. Awesome.
Yeah. Let me dig into this. Let me see if you recognize the author. I'd say make sure all the choices you make in life come from a point of awareness and not ignorance. This is an elderly gent talking to a younger gent. Do you recognize the author?
Yeah. This sounds familiar. This is something that I would say to my 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Well,
we found that as like it's kind of an anthem, it seems, sort of through your writing. We didn't know what to expect when we started, as with any book. And then the structure came clear, and I should share with you that we listened to the book as opposed to read it in text, which means that we got your voice as well, your intonation and your pacing. And so it really was sort of this this missive, like a letter to a younger man.
Yeah. No, it was designed that way, Kevin, because I've learned so much from books growing up, and I have to thank my parents for that, particularly my mom. We didn't have necessarily the means to buy books, and books were, growing up in the 1980s, 1990s in India, books were a luxury. And beyond your school library, if you had a book of your own, that meant you were from a family of means. So we never had any money to buy books, and we were always looking for an excuse and somehow. And mom fought her way through, made sure that dad gave some amount of money to buy these books on and off. And I just fell in love with books. And it's a tragedy when I see an entire generation, for no fault of theirs, frankly, living life without truly understanding and appreciating what books can do for one. And when I decided to write a book, it was only with one objective. I want people to fall in love with reading just as much as I did. And that meant I had to speak their language. I cannot be prescriptive. I cannot come in as a teacher trying to tell them of what the goodwill and good benefits of book reading are, because they're smart, they figure it out, but they still choose not to read for whatever reasons. And then my job as an author is to make the book as likable and consumable for this generation. And that's why I chose the format of the book, which is just such a strong departure from most books, as you would have figured. And you've heard the book. If you were to read it, you will appreciate it at a whole new level, because it's like every page is a chapter, if you will. And you could read just one page and just walk away feeling you still took something from the book while you never finished the book, or frankly, not even started it. And I'm glad it delivered that way. It kind of shows in the numbers and the response that I've got. So I'm happy that way.
It read like Proverbs. So, you know, in the Jewish scripture, you have the book of Proverbs. And one of the funny things that happens stylistically with that is, as soon as you're done with some kind of word of advice about how to you know, save and retain and keep your money, it immediately jumps to like what kind of a wife to choose, and then it immediately jumps to you know, what's a good way to till your field, and so on. So many of the great like foundational works of history, Hesiod's Works and Days is like this too. It's wisdom. It's collected, short wisdom.
Yeah. No, and I'm so glad someone like you would see through that. For most people, this would be a very disconcerting format. But like, I don't want to read this. Like, this is context switching in a way that I'm not prepared for. I do not appreciate, and I certainly don't want to go through, because I like a happy flow and I like a certain rhythm to it. And there are so many well-established templates of how you would go about writing a book and thus go about consuming one. I have had so many people who are active readers saying, I didn't like the format at all. And I'm like, well, I understand and appreciate that the book was not for you. And I don't think you would ever want to pick this up. And if you do, it's mostly your fault, because I start with the book saying this can be the most useless purchase you will ever buy or ever make, because this book will not share anything that is new for you. It's completely all over the place, because it's meant to provoke. It's meant for you to pause and reflect, and perhaps even think, you know what, I'm done for today. I don't want to go to the next chapter, the next page, even the next clip. I'm done for this. I want to just absorb that, reflect upon it, see if it makes sense, maybe hear it again or read it again tomorrow or whenever I pick it up next, and just ruminate over it. And I have had so many people who say that, like, I read the book in 4 hours. It was awesome. But then I read it again, and this time I read it over 4 days, and it hit me differently. And I love that. Like, that's exactly how it was meant. And I'm so glad that you discovered that.
One of the things you said right at the outset, you just hinted at it, was nothing here is new. It's not fresh. It was an amazing early admission. And I'll tell you, because you're the 50th author that we've spoken to on this initiative. There's a real disposition among business authors in particular to go to great lengths to prove that the insight is new, that this is something you haven't heard before. If there's an element of surprise, that's a good thing. So I think you talk about counter culture for business books. Writing in a proverbial style is one thing, but then right at the outset, basically saying, these aren't my ideas. They're just great ideas of history. Like, if you recognize them as 3,000-year-old ideas, congratulations, they are. If you think you've read them elsewhere or you've thought them yourself, you have. What an interesting opening gambit, like an opening pawn move, to say, like, look, all copyrights, all information borrowed, stolen, picked up. I want to ask you about that. What do you make of that? First of all, you make that overt admission, let's say, but then you sort of share it with this joy. So let me ask you about
I'm 42, Kevin, and when you lived this long, and I wouldn't say it long in the sense of, oh my God, I'm old, but old enough to have experienced a lot, you would have gone through multiple hoops to recognize what is important in life and why and how. So I was certainly a very different person in my 20s, where I would want the world to believe that I'm smart and I'm unique and I have something different to offer that they perhaps have never heard of, a perspective that would blow their minds away. And over the years, I've come to realize that we're all standing on the shoulders of others. There is no unique thought. There never was. And everyone just builds upon what they have heard and then mixes it with their own experience to create something that could be in some way their own insight, that could very well be applicable only to their life and no one else's. And that admission means that everyone will see the same objective truth differently, will color it with their own lens, with their own biases, with their own experiences, with their own worldview, and come up with maybe another version of the truth, and perhaps believe that that is the ultimate truth, when the truth is, it isn't. It's just a concoction that has become a side effect of what was already in there. And my entire posturing, not posturing in the sense that I fake it, but this is who I am, is my content, and I've been doing it for several years now. The book was only an outcome of that, has always been around, I don't fake perfection. I'm not perfect in any way. In fact, most likely the reason that you will come to admire me or perhaps even listen to me is because you will see me as one of you and not someone that is so far away that you can only adore that, but never hope in hell to become that. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be, and I'm using this figuratively, I don't want to be Elon Musk. That seems so far out. Then I'm like, you know what? That person is not a human most likely an alien, and I can only admire that person or perhaps hate that person, but never be that person. I want to be relatable, and I love being relatable, and I love being the person that everyone feels is within their reach. So this comes very naturally to me. The admission that I don't have any unique idea, the admission that I have seen life through my own lens, created my own version of it, but that version is not unique. It's not something you'll hear for the first time. What it also does, and this is my belief, and it's served very well, so that's why I hold on to this belief, is when you do come across as human, when you do come across as fragile, when you do come across as just as humane as anyone else would imagine themselves to also be, you break ice in a way that very few things can. Because it's like, oh my God, this person is speaking my mind. Like, even I have a lot of thoughts that I don't think are great, but they're still my thoughts. And if they hear it from somebody that they feel is on a pedestal, then it just breaks ice in a way that very few other things can. And I have seen that work for me so much that I wouldn't have it any other way. My second book also starts with the same admission. It's like, if you thought the first book was perhaps the most useless book, this book could give it serious competition, because it's full of that one thing. Like, one thing that I do not like in life is someone giving you a prescription as if that's the only way to live life. I hate that. Like, that is where I lose respect in that moment for that person, in that context, whatever that scenario will be. I hate prescriptions. So I would always be cautious not to prescribe, not to suggest as this is the only way. And my second book, I was constantly fearing this as I was writing it. Oh my God, this will come across as prescriptive. This has come across as the only way of living life. This will come across as the know-it-all guru / teacher who's telling you this is the only way and there's no other way. So I was like, you know what? The best way to break away from that fear is to admit it upfront. This is what I'm scared of. I hate it personally. I wouldn't want you to believe that this is the only truth. What I'm offering is just one version of it amongst millions of others. And through this, hope that you come up with your own version of the truth. And if you do, awesome. If you still believe my version is the version you want to start with, good for you. Experiment, figure out your own. And I think it just relieves me of a lot of stress as well, or pressure.
You said that books, you were casting back to an earlier vintage of Ankur Warikoo. It's the schoolboy, maybe. But you said that books is this way to live other people's experiences, or live experiences you don't have to live through. That couldn't be a more timely comment. It was very interesting that it resonated with another line of study we were doing as a team, which is the concept of lived experience. Well, lived experience is very valuable, but it's also very expensive because you have to pay the price of living it. And in that style in which you're writing, and with the caveat that, like, look, guys, this might be nonsense. You may get into fully the third paragraph and say, why did I even waste the time? But you don't have to live it. That is one offer that every book makes, is it will cost you a little bit of time, but it will certainly cost you a lot less time than figuring it out for yourself. Yeah. Choice by choice, mistake by mistake, year by year.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Like, take me back into what you mean when you said a book is a way to live other experiences.
Yeah. I remember this tweet that I had shared long time back, which is, there are two ways to learn from mistakes in life. One is to make them yourselves. And as you rightly pointed out, that could be very expensive, undesirable. And the second way to learn from mistakes is to read books, because someone has documented their entire life, or at least their experiences, through the mistakes that they've made, the failures that they've had, and how they've learned from that. However, I also believe that the sheer awareness of a concept, Kevin, does not lead to action. What it does is it gives you a possible path. What I mean by that is, and this goes back to one of my favorite people who have lived on this planet, Richard Feynman, whose way of teaching, not just the fact that he was one of the brightest physics knowledgeable experts that the world has ever seen, but just the sheer curiosity and joy with which he looked at teaching, which is something that has deeply inspired me always. He said that you could know everything about a concept and yet know nothing about it. You could know its scientific name, its biological name, its chemical name, its attributes, its specifications, everything around that, and still you would have no idea what that means. So what a book does is that it does not allow you to live a certain experience. It allows you the awareness that a certain experience exists. And now it becomes your responsibility, should you wish to go about living that experience on your own, but with the awareness of what it could mean. You may still go through the same experience and still falter the same way as someone else did, and be like, oh my God, why did I go through it again? Or you could go through that experience and have an entirely new experience, which is so different from what you read, and be surprised at it. But if you didn't read that or didn't know of it in the first place, you wouldn't even know that something like that exists. And the only way for you to figure that out would be surreptitiously through your own life experiences, which in my opinion could be costly. So what books do, or at least did for me, and I hope it does for others as well, is make you aware of possibilities, infinite possibilities that exist out there, all of which, if you were to discover on your own, would be impossible in a lifetime, or even if you were to go through, expensive in our own admission. And that's why it's just this brilliant shortcut to get that index of experiences, if you will, and then just go about picking the ones that you would want to go with. And that's what I love about books.
You said, I think at least twice, that there were moments in the past where you were carrying around books like trophies, like, conspicuously, and you never name the books, but I was trying to invent in my head, I wonder which books he's talking about. That, you used to have books and sort of have them, maybe on the shelf or under your arm or something, kind of hoping that folks would think, oh, Ankur Warikoo is reading Plato's Republic. Or first, there's two questions in there, Ankur, for you. One is, what were the books? And two is, what do you think that is? What's going on when that happens?
Yeah, I love this question, and I'll answer both of them as honestly as I can. There were two books growing up that I felt if I held in my hand, it would make the world respect me and be in awe of me. One was The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And it was such a cult and a classic, particularly when you're in college, because the story of Howard Roark as the rebel, as the one who's so driven by objectivism as a core philosophy and tenet of living life, is what you would also want to stand for. It's almost like F you to the world. I will live it. I'm pure in my way, and I will not allow anything to be polluting my understanding of how the world should be, and so on. So that's one. And second, around that time, and this was because it's India, there was a book by an author called Vikram Seth, and the book was called A Suitable Boy. And it was a really thick book, a brilliant book, by the way. I never read it. I read The Fountainhead, and at that point in time, I was like, you know what? It's such a brilliant book. I'm done with fiction. I don't want to read any more fiction. And I never gave Suitable Boy a chance, which I should have, because I saw the movie later on, and it was a really nice movie. So I thought maybe the book would have been nicer, but I never got around to reading it. But these were two books that I used to almost show off. Not almost, I used to certainly show off in front of my college peers and everyone. And I think the reason is because back then, we didn't have social media. This is 1998 to 2002 that I'm talking about. So right before Facebook was to start in 2004 at Harvard. And the internet was a thing, but it was an expensive thing. So no Very few people had access to it. There were no phones. There was certainly no social media. So there was no way for you to actually represent your status the way that people can do easily now. I go, here's my Lamborghini. What color is it? Here are my sneakers. What brand is it? Here are my clothes. Here's my vacation. Here's my food. Here's my fancy hotel. There was nothing like that. So the entire status group was your immediate circle, that the kids that you studied with, the kids that stayed close to your house. That was it. A group of what, at best 50 kids. And those 50 kids and their view of you defined the entire world for you. That was it. If they thought that you were cool, you were cool. It didn't matter what 5,000 or 5 million other kids outside of this 50 thought about you, because they didn't even know of you and you didn't know of them. And that was a different world. It was just such a close-knit unit where you knew what to do to make people fall in love with you or admire you, adore you. And the group that I had, because I went to Delhi University at their North Campus, and it's a very British way of education, unlike the US, where the university has multiple colleges, like you would have for, say, an Oxford or a Cambridge, and each college would have all the disciplines that were there. So you would hang out with kids from all colleges, but it's a nice, happy campus. Colleges are nearby, so on. And that was the same environment that we had. And my group of the few kids that I had, they were all intellectually inclined. They were all reading books. They were all driven by literature. And so I knew that if I had to make a mark, it had to be the top tier of books, whether it made sense to me or not. And I do remember reading The Fountainhead at the age of 19, not getting anything, not understanding what the big deal about the book is, not understanding the nuance. And then I read it again at the age of 24 when I came back from the US, dropping out of my PhD, and I was a very different person at that point. And that book then hit me like a rock. And it changed so many things about how I saw myself and saw the world. And that's why I often say that every book has a timing. Every book will not hit you the same way at the same time. And this is the quote that I have in my second book, it's only when the student is ready that the teacher appears. And that's so true for books as well.
It's one of the markers of what they often call the great books, which is a real nebulous combination of actual books. I mean, there's like ones falling in and falling out all the time, but they usually can show up for you 5 or 6 times during the path of life.
Yeah.
So that, you know, if you're enjoying them now at 42, well, just wait until 72. It's a new book. You're a new person and it's a new book.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's this you mentioned US and coming back, you sort of have this image of dog with a tail between his legs, but you have this lovely vulnerability, which we just mentioned, but a failure resume. So it's not, it's just not a light pawn move gambit. It's actually a really complex set of commitments that you make in your writing, in your blogging, on your videos as well, to just absolutely lay yourself bare and vulnerable on failures. And so you don't give a passing 1 or 2 word reference like, oh, there was a bit of a tough time with some schooling, but you go into detail, like this is what you thought and it was all wrong. And then, you know, you crashed hard and like dad was disappointed. And why did you do a failure resume like that? I guess I sort of want to ask you about the entire approach of so liberally sharing failures.
It has 2 reasons. I'll give you the macro reason, then the micro reason. The macro reason is growing up in a culture where failure is not spoken of, Kevin, and it's certainly not admired in any respect. And the reason is very simple. The reason is because we're a very young country, at least post-independence. We've struggled a lot for several decades. Opportunities have been scarce. Population has only been rising. So the demand for those opportunities has only been in one direction, and that's upwards. And that means if you failed in the India of 1960s, 70s, even 80s, 90s, it could mean the end of everything. There was no redemption. There was no famous Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook fail fast philosophy. There's no failing fast. You fail and you could be dead. That's it. Game over. And that's why failing was something that constantly in our culture has not been looked at favorably. And it was always like, do whatever you can to not fail. Now, certainly the world's changed, and it's changed tremendously and faster than anyone imagined. And now India is a land of opportunities. We are growing faster than most other large economies. We have a demographic dividend that's yielding results for us. We're an extremely young country. There's only one direction that we can look at. Everyone's very optimistic. We have stability in our financial systems, in our political systems, and blah, 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 blah. So things seem in the right direction. And I don't want the hangover of the previous generation, for no fault of theirs, by the way, to spill over to the new one and in any way diminish the audacity or the ambition with which they approach life. They shouldn't fear failure because everyone's going to fail. Everyone will inevitably fail. The question is not whether you can avoid failure. The question is, what can you learn from it once you do? And that was the macro sentiment. So when I failed, and gloriously so at the age of 24, and it's not a failure when I think about it now, and in hindsight, it certainly wasn't a failure. It was the best move that I made in my life. But back then, coming out of the US, dropping out of my PhD when I was on 100% scholarship, top of my class, doing something that I wanted to do at a university that I wanted to be at, it was deemed a failure. It was a failure that I dropped out of education. It was a failure that I didn't do enough to change the orbit that I was born in and change the destiny of my entire family, not just myself. And because I learned the hard way from that, and I recognized what it did for me, I wanted to speak actively about it. But I didn't know how. Like, I have always been comfortable being vulnerable, and I've been that person as a leader, as a founder, as an entrepreneur. But publicly, it's a very different persona. And in 2017 came the micro thing that gave me that inspiration. And this was a professor at Princeton. His name, if I pronounce it right, is Johannes Haashofer. And Johannes Haashofer, an accomplished professor at Princeton, came up with his CV of failures. And he had a beautiful thought behind it. He said, when you share a resume or a CV, it's often all the things that you're chest thumping about. I did this, this is my paper. And these are academics, right? So they'll be tom-tomming about, oh, this journal, that journal, this offer, this tenure, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but we very rarely talk about how did we get there in the first place? Because there would be so many things that didn't happen to us for this to have happened to us. So he made a list of all the things that he had failed at, all the universities that didn't accept him, all the publications that refused him, all the times that he wanted to get something done and couldn't. And when I read that, I was like, this is it. This is it. This is what I've been looking for. And I'd failed so many times that it took me, I believe, less than half an hour or so to come up with my first version of the failure resume. And this was 2017, before I was anything that I am possibly today. And I published it online, not knowing what would happen to it. And surprisingly, it blew up. And a lot of people wrote in saying, oh my God, we looked at you and we thought that you're someone who's never done anything wrong in their life. And everything's been like, right. But now for the first time, we see you as someone who's failed. And that, strangely enough, gives us hope, because we also were failing, but now we know that that's never the end. And that was awesome. And at the age of 40 in 2020, I thought this is a good time to update my failure resume. And I had so many failures between 2017 and 2020 that it didn't take me a long time to update that resume as well. And I did that. And then when I was writing the book, I was like, this has to go in. This has to be documented forever, because I do want to let the world know in some shape and form that everyone has gone through a journey that they may think they haven't. But the question is what you've learned from it. So the failure resume became a thing. And I'm glad that I got that. And I wrote an email to Johannes Hassoffer. Of course, never heard back from him, but I did write an email saying, you know what, thank you, professor, because your idea gave wings to something that I always had in my mind, but I never knew could happen. And it happened.
We have a lot of clients that are investors, value-based. In Singapore, there's a lot, and value-based or just stock pickers or kind of long-only growth-based investors. And one of the pieces of wisdom in that world is that they always try to watch whether or not they've been smart or lucky. So you don't want to take a successful stock pick and congratulate yourself too quickly on your analysis, because you need to see a causal link between your analysis. So on that side, successes actually successes are not so good a lesson resource, because sometimes in that world they say the success could be deceptive.
Yeah.
But I think failures, at least in that world, but I imagine by parallel in many other worlds, are much better teachers, because they're a much better causal link to what went wrong as opposed to the link of what went right, just because you succeeded. Maybe the stars aligned for you, and the guy who signed the big deal just had extra money to throw somewhere. All kinds of things may have happened you can't account for. But failures, you tend to get a pretty good audit trail of exactly where you screwed it up. So you have articulate lessons.
Yeah, that's so true. That is so true. And a lot of people, when you make this remark, Kevin, it reminds me, I often acknowledge the role of luck in my life. And I'm a physicist by training. So I am designed, and my mental orientation is, if I can't see it, it most likely doesn't exist. But then I don't want to dismiss luck just because of that, just because I don't have a way of qualifying luck, measuring it, and making its presence felt. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because if I look back at my life, there's so many things that happen that I just can't explain. I just cannot explain. And I was like, right person at the right time. That's just it. And I often say this, and a lot of people think that, no, it's like a humble brag that, 99% or definitely an obnoxiously high percent of where I am today is attributed to luck and not my talent or any capability, and certainly not any special powers that I have beyond anyone. But I do in my heart know that there were several things that fell into place to get me to where I am. And that's why my only job is to backtrack my journey and hopefully find things that I did to influence that luck and to increase the surface area of that luck. I still couldn't predict what would happen, but I could perhaps change the probability at that happening. And if that could happen, then I think we play a small role in how we want to live life.
Well, your book is titled "Do Epic Shit," not think epic shit, or try epic shit, or imagine epic shit, or wonder about epic shit. And I think there's a pretty good pretty good clue to your style, and maybe to the reason for the luck that has come your way.
It has. The story of Do Epic Shit is something that I often share. This is 2011. I have two very dear friends of mine who are also entrepreneurs. We became entrepreneurs around the same time in 2009, 2010. So we've kind of grown up together, while there's an age difference in ours. And on my birthday that year in 2011, they gifted me a poster saying "Do Epic Shit." And back then it was like, cool. Oh, that sounds really fancy. I put it on my desk and I used to stare at it every day, not frankly giving thought. And as I stared at it every day, it became obvious to me over time that this is how I would want to live life. It is about doing, which is action is greater than thought. And I'm a firm believer of that. Ideas are dime a dozen. And it frankly doesn't matter if you had the first idea. The one who did something about it is the one who will learn the most from it. It's about epic, which is doing something greater than yourself, not be consumed by who you are, not be parochial in your approach, but look at something which is far bigger than what you stand for. And shit is just colloquial for having fun while you're doing it. It's not a drag. You don't get up every Monday morning and it's like, oh my God, another week. So it's about doing things that are bigger than you and you having fun while you're doing it. And that's how I would want to live life, irrespective of what I'm doing and where it takes me. And when the name of the first book had to be chosen, it was very clear to me that this would be it.
Okay, so let's talk about the marriage between the two books, because the second one is called Get Epic Shit Done. And so there's a hint there too that there's more to it than the 3-word message. There's a little more that needs to come out. So can you just give folks kind of an entree into book 2?
Sure. So when I wrote Do Epic Shit, the most recurring feedback that I got was it made us think. It really provoked us. We stopped, we paused, we reflected. And as we did that, we went in several directions. But it didn't really tell us what could we do next. So it left us in some way hanging. I was like, that's a fair comment. That's absolutely right. And particularly for this generation, the generation that I'm writing for, they're so used to, Kevin, consuming listicles. 3 things that every billionaire does. The first thing, they wake up in the morning, 5 ways to win your love life, 7 ways to crack an interview. You'll not believe number 5. Like, it's just this complete BuzzFeedish way of living life and consuming content that they're used to having this listicle thrown at them. Go and do these 3 things, 5 things, 7 things, and you'll figure something out. So I was certain that the next book I wanted to write would be, let's take them from this thinking to this acting mode, and let's get them to act. And how do we get them to act? We get them to act by making it very specific. What is it that you're acting on? So I don't want to write a generic self-help book, that act, follow your passion, do this, blah, 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 because there's enough. And frankly, I'm not driven by that. So I went back and said, what are the questions that people often ask? And the inspiration of that, funny enough, was that as a student of physics at Delhi University in my undergrad, we had this fascinating book called Kunji, Kunji. It's a Hindi word, and it basically means key. And what's it the key to? It had the questions that have been asked in the last 10-year examinations. So in the last 10 years, all the exams, all the questions that were asked are in there with the answers. And it's basically a key for you to unlock what could be the next examination about. Because there was always this recurring pattern. Like, professors tend to be lazy, so they'll be like, you know what? Let's just give them something that we've already asked in the past and just repurpose the same questions. So if you went through that book, which is the last 10-year question papers, you had a very high probability of scoring well in the examination, irrespective of whether you'd paid attention in the classes, made any notes, or were even a bright student. And I was like, there needs to be a kunji or a key for life as well. So I went back and I compiled all the frequently asked questions that people used to ask me. And I came up with a list of about 57 of them. We then started trimming them down, and we came to a list of 36. So these 36 were the life questions that I attempted to answer. And I didn't want to answer them as just paragraphs by paragraphs by paragraphs. So I was inspired by 2 things. I was inspired by the Socrates-Plato conversation, which is seminal in its work of a student-teacher interaction, defining what I would argue are the foundations of philosophy and life as we look at it in so many ways. And second, a book that I really loved in recent times, Courage to be Disliked, which again was in the format of a student and a philosopher. And I said, I like that format. I like this question and answer format. So we wrote it in a question and answer format where the student starts with the main question and then keeps asking questions until hopefully the teacher has appeared because the student is ready. And that was the flow. So in summary, Get Epic Shit Done is a list of 36 life questions that everyone in their life at any point of time does encounter, and written in a format of a student and a teacher conversation, trying to hopefully give you a direction on how to solve that life question problem.
Going back, if you will, to do, that word do, one of the things that people see you as, and I sure when I led our team through kind of researching and studying you, is productivity. They'll think of you as a source for great productivity, maybe hacks or maybe general wisdom, etc. But there's one thing in particular I think is really interesting to hear more about: the calendar. So you give some advice on it, but you definitely stake a personal claim on it. You're like, I live by this calendar. Can you just say how that works? Like, I want to look at the mechanics of it. Like, how do you enter things and how many things? Just tell us about your calendar, because I think there's something deep in there, and I'd like to hear more. And I think probably the folks that we work with a lot who are professionals, Ankur, they have 2-3 degrees. They're 35 years to kind of 75 years of age.
Yeah.
But they're very smart, and they're very capable anyway, but they never give up on productivity. And they're always looking for sort of things that are either regimen or discipline or certain shortcuts and so forth. I really want to hear about the calendar, please.
Yeah. No. Thank you for asking that question. I'm very passionate about that. So there are 3 principles that I basically operate with when it comes to my time, and the calendar being the most important tool that I use to take charge of my time. The first thing, Kevin, is I don't try and remember anything. I don't try and remember anything. I'm always carrying a notebook, and I will record things. If there is anything that I need to get done, it will either go as an email to myself, and it could be scheduled to come at a certain point of time when I need to get it done. If it's a recurring thing, I will get it on my calendar. If it's a one-off thing as well, that is a task, I will get it on my calendar. So my calendar on my phone and on my desktop or my laptop is always open, and I'm always feeding it in, because I'm just entering everything that I can so that I free my mind from trying to remember anything at all. So that's principle 1. Principle 2 is, on that calendar, I would block out time for myself. So that's my non-negotiable time. This is the time that I use to do things that I want to do. It could be work, but it could also be thinking time. It could be reading time. It could be anything where I don't want any external party to throw their weight around and capture that time. So no one has access to that. The only person who has access to my entire calendar is actually my wife. She's the only one who has edit rights to my calendar. So she can add whatever she wants, and I'll still have to, because it'll be my calendar. And the third principle is I would make the rest of those slots open through a tool. So the tool that I use is a tool called Calendly, and Calendly is very nifty. And there are lots of other calendar management tools that I use. I use Calendly for a really long time, and it basically has those hours slotted. So on Monday, nobody gets any hours. On Tuesday, it's only the first half. On Wednesday, it's only the first half, blah, 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 blah. Right? So all of those were there. And then I have just this recurrence, because everything now is there on my calendar. I look at my calendar at the start of my day, and I look at what needs to be done. And one glance at it, and I know how my day is going to go. I know instantly how my day is going to go. And the reason is the macro principle that I operate with. And this is something that I learned very early on in my life. At the age of 13, I was preparing for one of the toughest engineering examinations that are there in our country. And it required me to be very committed as a student in terms of study hours. It's an intensely difficult examination. Less than 2% people clear it. And it's one of the most prestigious institutes of engineering in the country. I wasn't very happy of how my study was progressing. And as a science student, the only thing that I knew was that if you want to change something, you start by measuring it. So I started documenting at the age of 13, every single hour of my time once I'd woken up to the point that I went to bed. My waking hours, every single hour was documented. It was there on a notebook, and I would say, this hour I did this hour I did this hour I did this. It wasn't meant to change, it was just meant to record. But I loved it so much because it gave me a hold on what I was truly doing, that I did that for another 13 years. So till the point I graduated out of business school at the age of 26, I maintained an hourly log of every single waking hour of mine, every single day. So if you were to ask me, hey, what were you doing on the 15th of March, 2003 at 9:49 a.m. India time, I will have the answer. It's there on a notebook or an Excel sheet. What did it do? It basically made me understand how the mix of my time towards things that I love doing, things that I'm forced to do, things that I have to do, and things that I choose to do but may not be as important to me, that mix makes me productive or makes me happy. So today, my calendar is basically that mix, and I optimize it over a week. I add just as frequently as I have to. I delete just as frequently as I add to. If anything is on my calendar, it is set in stone, and something really earth-shattering will have to happen to change that. And I just abide by it because I'm the controller of it. I'm not a slave to it. I'm the owner and I'm the master. So I will dictate what goes in, but once it goes in, it's sacrosanct. And then I operate it clinically by that. And it works beautifully for me because then I don't have to remember. I don't have to second guess. I know exactly how I have to switch the context. And it makes me really productive because I'm just used to doing that for so many years.
When some of the people who are trying to inculcate this practice discover that they set aside 30 minutes to edit a document, and then lo and behold, like 67 minutes in, think, oh shit, that doesn't work. I don't think I can do this calendar thing, because every time I take a crack at it, I'm under budgeting, over budgeting. The thing has two parts and I only estimated one. What do you suggest? Because I know you don't believe this, Ankur, but not everybody starts to regimen their life at 13 for the examinations.
Yeah,
That's a unique story.
And I wouldn't say that that's necessary for you to be following a routine. And what you say, Kevin, is absolutely right. There will be several occasions where you will start a task without any understanding of how long it's going to take, and you will realize that you have under budgeted, over budgeted. And what you ought to do, just as any other discipline in life, is to learn from that and to accommodate that the next time you go about doing it. I'll give you a good example. I run a course on time management, and every month we have a live class where thousands of students join and they ask me questions. And one of those frequently asked questions is precisely this question, which is, hey, I want to stick to a routine and I have one, but something invariably happens and throws me off guard. And it just takes me time to get back to that routine. And I was like, how often does it happen? And they're like, almost every day. I said, great. If something is happening every single day, it's no longer unpredictable. What is unpredictable is what's going to happen, but not the fact that it will happen. So you are actually selling yourself short and putting yourself in a difficult situation by still calling it unpredictable and not accounting for it. Account for it. You don't have to account for what's going to happen, but you certainly need to account for something happening. That is the way that you think about that. So one exercise that I give people at the end of this time management course is the same thing that I did for 13 years. Just log every single hour of your day for 10 days. I just ask for 10 days. One, it's ridiculous how many people can't even do it for 2 days because they just get done with it. They're like, it's hard. I don't want to do it. I stare at it. It makes me feel really bad about myself. But the ones who do finish those 10 days, they are a changed person. It just takes 10 days because what they discover is something they'd never discovered before. Where does the time go? How does it make them feel? Why are they spending their time there? These are questions they never asked. But once they stare at that 10-day and that cycle of a week, which will include a work week, work days, weekends, and everything, you would have covered possibly all nuances and ups and downs. that will give you a nice, happy sense, not concretely, but certainly directionally, of how your day is going to look like and how do you want to set your routine there. And that's what you have to do. If something takes 60 minutes instead of 30 minutes that you have, then you ought to be smart and say, hey, the next time I'm doing something which is for the first time and I have no sense of how much it's going to take, I will overcompensate. I will over budget. And I will be smart about that, learning from my experience. But if we still try to cut it too close, then we're not learning.
There's another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the Warikoo. And I want to ask you about that now, because calendars are one of those things that you do own for yourself, but then they touch other people. Other people can be late. You can be late for them. They can slide in and require time on your calendar. Tell us about the Warikoo, and as an add-on to that, how you figure out a calendar when obviously there's others. Well, we know your wife is the number one other. She's the only one with the edit rights, but there are others who touch it.
True. So for those who do not know, Warikoo is basically the name of my team. We are a team of 13 people, all of which are remotely based all across the country. And we don't work from an office, but we make this entire machinery happen of both content that you see on social media and also the courses that I run as an educator. And the nuances there, Kevin, because it's a small team, so frankly, I can get past this. I don't know how things will change, and things will certainly change once we get bigger, if we do get bigger, is number one, we're fully remote. So no one has to show up anywhere. They just have to show up for their work. And number two, that work doesn't need to be synchronous. Nothing of what we do is synchronous. We meet synchronously only once a week for 1 hour, Monday, 7 p.m., where we have something called a weekly business review or a WBR. We go through every platform, how it performed. We go deep into the data. And then we also spend some nice, happy time chattering and just discussing things in life. And once that is done, everyone is on their own. There are very clear processes. I am an animal of process and routine, as you would have figured from my responses. So everything works. It's like a factory. While we're running content, and it seems like, oh, it's content, right? It's fun, YouTube videos and Instagram Reels and so on. No. We take it very, very seriously. So everything is a process. We use Asana, which is a project management tool.
Yes.
Everyone is assigned a task. Everyone knows what they have to do, by when they have to do it. Everyone's graded on their quality. Everyone's timeliness is reported. Everyone is compensated as a variable based on their timeliness and the quality of work that they deliver. And all of that data is available for everyone to see at any point of time. There's nothing that's hidden. So we are 100% transparent. Everyone's compensation, designation, everything is known to everyone. It's a Google Doc that is open. Any new person joins, their compensation, everything is already there. Everyone knows how much I earn to how much the newest intern does. What is their compensation? What the work they do? What are their timelines? How well have they done in the past? Everything is transparent. And the principle there is, I don't want any power equation to come because of information asymmetry. Nobody should exercise control or power because they know something that someone else doesn't. That's when things start breaking, at least in my opinion. And we meet once every quarter. That's the time we meet. We go for an offsite, which is usually 4 to 5 days. The next one is happening next week, incidentally. And we look forward to that because that's the time when we all come together and we just have a nice, happy time. There's no work done during that. Everyone scheduled their work much in advance for it. And that's how we operate. Because it's asynchronous, because it's remote, everyone manages their own time and we don't micromanage how they do it. We have a really nice, happy buffer of about 2 weeks for the content. So when I shoot to all the way when it goes live is a 2-week gap. Within those 2 weeks, how they plan themselves is their choice. Someone is a procrastinator, they want to do it at the end, their call. Someone is an optimizer, they want to do it right in the beginning and take the rest of the week off, their choice. Someone wants to do it regularly every day, their choice. We don't get into that. All that we care about is show up on time and do the right quality of work. And as long as you're doing it, how you manage yourself within your call. And it seems to work. But as I said, it's a small unit, so it's easy to make that work. When I was running a 400 people team at Nearby, which was my previous startup, things were very different because everything was there in a calendar and everything was there in office. And this was pre-COVID, so everything was synchronous. And there were like meetings and meetings and meetings. I don't know how the world will be post-COVID. If I were to run again a 400 people team, I hope I never get to run a 400 people team. I don't like big teams anymore. But so far, it's working very well.
My God, I thought the failure resume was bold. I have to tell you that I was getting like shivers thinking about the idea of total transparency. It's very hard if you haven't been in that environment. I'll also tell you one of the recent hires that we interviewed was a refugee fleeing a company because they took the veil off. They said we're gonna engage in this. It's gonna be total transparency. And as soon as they did, she was like, "What the hell? Like I'm being grossly underpaid here. Like I'm out of here." So she asked to get a raise and didn't get it, and so left. So I think that's a bold world that you've decided to live in. But I would imagine, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you make that choice at the start, then it's actually a self-fulfilling culture commitment.
Yeah. It's really hard to make it midway. It's really, really hard. And I can imagine how. For the longest time, I wanted to do it Nearby, but never got around doing it. So when I started this new startup, I was like, I want to do this from day one. And thankfully, it's worked really well because it just cuts out on so much of garbage that people spend their time on, which is unnecessary and non-productive. Like eliminate all reasons for people to engage in water cooler conversations that are not helping them.
Yeah. Ankur, that's an hour. It flew by. We love your work, what you're doing. It's unsurprising that it's been so enjoyable to listen to you after listening through to the book, and reading all the things that you've had to write. Do you have any sort of message for the folks that we work with? I've described them. They're mainly in Southeast Asia and to some extent in Australia, North America. But I think they really, we will share your writing with them and sort of who you are liberally. But if there's anything in particular that you want to leave as a last note, I'd like to let you have the last word.
No, I really like the conversations. I love the thoughtful questions that you ask, Kevin. Thank you for engaging. And my only piece of advice will be the only thing that's worked for me, and that's why I think I have the liberty to say this, is when you do share whatever is it that you have learned and experienced in life, it's a wonderful step to take. I believe sharing is the only way that we progress as a civilization. But then it also comes with the responsibility that when you do share, it's not to share what you know, it's to help somebody else comprehend what is it that you want to share. So you owe it to the reader, to your quote unquote client, to your customer, to your user, to your patron, that you say it in a way that they can comprehend you, as against you say it in a way that you want to share to the world. There could be a difference, and if there is a difference, then I'd love for you to appreciate that power equation lies with them and not so much as you. And once you do that, I think the world just becomes a better place.